not going to use a microphone. It's a small room and I'm plenty loud. So what I was going to go through today is basically a lot of the information that it takes to actually collect survey data by drone. And by the way, I know this is kind of a small group today. If you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in at any point. But what I wanted to cover today is basically the complete workflow for drone surveying. So that means everything from what hardware you ought to use, but also through things like mission planning. So how do you actually fly? How do you set up your flight plan? Where do you set your ground control points? Things like that. Setting ground control points is obviously a really, really critical component for accuracy. And in fact, everything that we talk about is going to be geared towards surveying specifically, right? This isn't flying a drone for real estate purposes. This is for actually getting survey-grade data. So when we say survey-grade, what do we mean is typically, how do you get a 1/10 of a foot accuracy on a CAD rapid line or an actual CAD plan? Go from there. So setting your ground control points, the field operations, and then we'll touch on the office workflow a little bit as well. But since we only have just about an hour today, I'm mostly going to cover the field workflow of actually collecting the raw data rather than processing it right now. For what it's worth, I did a talk earlier today about some of the data processing, so if you weren't in on that and want some of that, feel free to come talk to me afterwards as I can get you that information as well. So a little bit of just brief cut information about the company. We turn drone photos into land survey data. We've been doing it since 2014. We have hundreds of surveyors and engineers as clients across the country. So we actually have a lot of experience. All told, I think we've now done about just over 3,000 different individual surveying projects that we've delivered. So we've actually had a lot of experience of how things are done improperly that have taught us how to actually do things the right way. So what's the end goal of all of this? What are we actually trying to do here? The goal is not to fly a drone because it's a cool technology or something. The real goal, I know a few of you were in my previous session, so forgive me, the first 5 minutes are going to be a little boring, but the end goal is going to be better deliverables, which means your line work with ortho photos backing them better than you'd be able to get with just a total station or a GPS in terms of what you can see. But also the two other really, really key ones here are saving time and saving money. A good drone program shouldn't be a, wow, look, this is cool. It should actually get to what you need it to do faster and cheaper than alternative methods. And when it comes to surveying, that means being able to topo 100 acres in a matter of hours, not a matter of days or something like that. And ultimately, when we talk about that final goal, a survey should look exactly the same whether it was done on the ground with traditional methods or whether it was done in the air with a drone. So the one thing that I'll hammer on throughout the entire course, a lot of what I'm going to talk about with field operations workflows are how to save time and money. It's not necessarily the perfect, most amazing, best way to do it. The best way to do something might be to have $500,000 worth of hardware and a team of 25 people. But if you can get 99% of that effort with one person and a $5,000 drone, then that's probably what we're going to recommend. So everything I'm talking about today is really hammering on this real-world efficiency, saving time, saving money, getting the right data, and getting it the first time reliably. Nothing kills efficiency like field revisits, for example. So a lot of what we're going to do is making sure that you don't have to do any field revisits. So the total workflow starts with when you first need to plan a project, figuring out if it's a good project to fly, setting your GCP targets, collecting the data in the field, and then in the office there's photogrammetry, line work, and then getting it all into CAD. That's what we view as the complete workflow. Splitting it up, the first half is going to be field data collection, which is actually going to be, like I said, the mission planning, setting GCP targets, collecting data, and that's what we're going to focus on today, is that field data collection side, what mission planning is, how to set ground control points, and some information about that. Overall, I mean, there's a journey that most land surveyors go through when they're starting out with drone technology. And because we've worked with a couple hundred clients, we've seen this pretty similar across the board. Some people will be able to go through this in just a couple of months, and others it might take years for them to do the whole thing, or never even get to the top. But it starts with just using a drone for basic photos and videos, right? Flying your drone, this is something that maybe would be used for commercial real estate agents or something that are just taking pictures of a property to put on a website. That's step one. Step two is actually turning that into ortho photos. So that's something like Drone Deploy. You throw your photos at an automated service, it stitches everything together, and you get a nice, pretty not really accurate at that point. It's not going to be survey quality, or if it is accurate, you don't know how accurate it is. So the next step is integrating your ground control points to actually get your high accuracy, high precision ortho photos. And not just having those high accuracy, high precision, but knowing what level of accuracy and precision you have. If you put in ground control points, is your project accurate to 1/10 of a foot, 2/10, 3/10? Well, you got to actually be able to measure that and understand what you're doing. Once you get your ortho photo, taking the next step into 3D data is where most people go. Working with point clouds and digital surface models. These are going to be your rich 3D model data that comes out of something like Pix4D. Very highly detailed, but also a pain because it can often include just digital artifacts, and it includes everything that's there. Cars, plants, foliage, a lot of information that you don't need. So the next step after that is getting clean CAD drawings. So that means cleaning a lot of that data out, getting rid of the cars, getting rid of the artifacts, extracting only the data you need. Maybe it's topo points and brake lines, maybe it's planimetry for a ALTA survey, maybe it's parking stalls, whatever it is for your project, getting the clean CAD drawings is the next step. Going after that, actually being able to turn that into a final survey deliverable is the next step on the journey, and being able to integrate in your existing survey data, add in your culture, information, symbology, layers, just all of that to actually make it a final survey deliverable. But really the peak of that is integrating all of it together to get to a reliable, repeatable, every time you go out with the drone, you know the type of data that you're going to get back. You know that it's going to be this exact survey. Just right now, it's, you guys know, if you go out with your GPS, you have a plan, this is what you're going to get. You know the workflow. It's standardized. You can go to the field once and actually collect the right data. And that's what companies that are experienced with drones actually get to, and that's what I'm going to talk about. All right, so everyone that was in my morning session can now wake back up because we'll get into stuff that I haven't talked about yet. So first let's talk about drone hardware. There's a lot of different hardware options out there. Heck, even on the floor today, there's a whole bunch of different hardware options out there. As far as me personally as a photogrammetrist and as a company goes, I'm hardware agnostic. We'll process just about anything. But some are definitely going to be more easy to use than others, some are going to be more reliable than others, and some are going to be way more affordable and more expensive than others. So let's start with sensor options. There are three general categories of sensor options that people use for drone technology. The first is a drone-specific camera. So that's going to be something like a DJI Phantom 4 Pro or a Mavic 2, where the camera itself is going to be integrated onto the drone itself. These are honestly really, really good options out there. I say the cost is about $4,000 all in. That's including all of your cases, batteries, and whatnot. The drone itself, as I'm sure you can find on just Amazon, costs about $1,500 or something, but you need a whole bunch of other stuff to make it actually a good field kit. And actually, with a good workflow, and that's what we're talking about today, you're going to get about 1/10 of a foot accuracy. Next up is the large independent camera. So this is something that, for those familiar, you mount on something like a DJI M600 series, a huge custom multi-rotor, like a Sony A7R. There are other DSLRs that can get you up to about 50 megapixels per photo. You're looking at about $20,000, sometimes $30,000 all in for the airframe, for the sensors, for the integration. Those will actually get you about 1/10 of a foot accuracy as well. And then of course LiDAR too. LiDAR is another technology that a lot of people are looking at. It is very expensive for a good LiDAR system. You can buy a LiDAR system for $50,000, but that's not that much better than strapping a laser pointer to a drone with duct tape, so I wouldn't really recommend it. But the actual good ones that are capable of survey grade stuff are going to cost you about $150,000 to $200,000 all in. So where do we stand on this sort of technology? Our preference, honestly, especially for people that are, just getting started, these drone-specific cameras like the Phantom 4, they're really great. They're really reliable, they're easy to use, kind of idiot-proof. Large independent cameras, the reason we don't like them is not because they don't produce good data. They actually do. They produce marginally better data than the drone-specific cameras, but because they lead to a really complicated workflow. The camera is not integrated to the drone, so we've seen a lot of errors of people in the field where, the camera's shutter triggering mechanism got screwed up, and so they flew the drone, but it didn't actually take any pictures. Well, that's a pain. And that goes back to what I was saying about making sure that you have a drone program that saves you time and money, right? You have this incredible camera, but if it doesn't actually work when you push the fly button, that's not going to save you time and money. You have to then go back, fix it, come back into the field, waste a whole bunch of time, and that's a pain. And then LiDAR is an interesting one because it's really a rapidly changing technology. Right now, my biggest problem with LiDAR is simply the ROI, the cost on it. The data's really good, but the cost isn't even just the cost of the system at $200,000. It's the cost of data processing. Processing LiDAR data takes a ton of time and a lot of man-hours just because of the way that it works. And that means that processing the data costs a lot of money too, because you have to pay someone all of that. So honestly, even if the LiDAR sensor were free, there would need to be some additional steps in the data processing workflow before it could actually be a really good solution. So overall, it has some positives, some negatives. LiDAR, especially if you're using manned aerial LiDAR, so where you can put a $1 million sensor on an airplane and cover a couple hundred square miles, that's actually a great option. We really like that. That's been proven for a while. Drone-based LiDAR, we're going to wait until the cost comes down and the accuracy goes up. And there's a lot of technology out there that says it could be done in the next 3 to 5 years or so. But granted, I was saying that about 3 years ago, and we're still saying it's about 3 years before LiDAR really becomes, it gets to a price point where it's a little bit more mainstream. So honestly, we love the technology, we love the data, it produces high quality data, but the ROI is just not quite there yet from what we've seen. So moving on to sensor, you have the sensor, but then you also have your airframe options as well. And these are, again, I think they're examples of all 3 of these exact aircraft in the exhibit hall. And they all work. Small multi-rotors, like the DJI Phantom 4 Pro, which was actually recently discontinued, and it's been replaced by the Mavic 2 Pro, which for anyone that's curious on the data side, we've done a lot of testing. They're comparable as far as from a data quality and reliability standpoint goes. The Mavic's smaller, Phantom 4 is a great aircraft, but totally comparable in terms of data quality. $4,000, 10th of a foot accuracy. Your multi-rotors are going to be big, expensive, cumbersome for those large multi-rotors. Still about a 10th of a foot accuracy once you factor in all the real world noise. And then you have your fixed wings. So this one up there, the SenseFly EV, is your traditional fixed wing. Those have some trade-offs. Just the nature of physics, a fixed wing can cover a whole heck of a lot more ground, typically a couple hundred acres. But because of how it works, it has to fly high and fast. It can't fly at 2 miles an hour and 100 feet above the ground like a multi-rotor can. It has to fly 300, 400 feet above ground, 20 miles an hour. And that means it doesn't actually get quite as good accuracy on the high end as any of the multi-rotors will. But if you're doing huge swaths of land and need 1-foot contours, then it's a fantastic solution for that. They're also pretty expensive, pretty hard to use just because they have the belly. Overall, which one's the best? There really is no best. It's kind of a what's the right tool for the job. They all have their right applications. Overall, the small multi-rotors, again, kind of win because they're so cheap they can be applied to a much broader set of projects, and you don't need as much budget. So people that are just getting started, we really like those small multi-rotors. Another question that's becoming more popular now is RTK versus non-RTK enabled. As aircraft are getting more popular with dual-band RTK GNSS receivers built on top of them, they're actually putting out really, really high-quality data that lets you set fewer ground control points and do less ground surveying than you need to otherwise. There are a couple of different options where most drones, especially recently, until very recently, most drones relied entirely on ground control points. So the photos themselves may get consumer-grade GPS on it, which is about as accurate as the blue dot on your phone. So it's helpful, but it's not going to be super, super precise. But now with these dual-band antennas on top, there's airborne RTK or airborne PPK. RTK being, of course, real-time kinematic, PPK being post-processed. So RTK does all of the processing in the field in real time. PPK does all of it in the office where you post-process it. We're pretty unambiguous about this. We really, really like a post-processing workflow over a real-time one. And that just goes to straight-up workflow reliability. RTK requires really good radio signal connections. It requires sometimes a 4G internet connection while you're out in the field. And if any of those data links drops for even a couple of seconds, it'll have really significant impacts in your data. Whereas when you post-process it, you don't need live radio links. It's a much more robust, reliable workflow. If it doesn't work out perfectly with one base station, you can switch to a CORS base station. You can use your own base station. It's just a much more reliable, robust workflow. And since it's photogrammetry, you have to process it in the office anyway, so you're not actually losing anything by losing a little bit of time, because you would have spent that time in the office anyway. So overall, at least for people that are just getting started, right now the best option out there is the DJI Phantom 4 RTK drone. Starts at about $7,500. We really like it. If you're curious, we process all types of data ourselves, from the Mavic and Phantom series all the way up to EB and big, huge, crazy $50,000, $100,000 drone setups as well. But this is really the best bang for your buck out there right now. So that's kind of hardware in a nutshell. Anyone have any questions on hardware? I'm happy to answer if anyone's curious about some of the different options out there.
What is the maintenance on this usually?
The maintenance on this, on the Phantoms, is negligible. They can usually last over a year without any sort of maintenance whatsoever. The higher end drones you go, the more maintenance you actually have to perform as well. Things like the M600 have a lot more exposed parts, so they need to be monitored for any sort of corrosion, for loose wires, which just kind of adds to the thing where, yeah, it's great data, but it's kind of a pain to work with. So we typically don't like recommending it unless you really, really are into that sort of thing. I don't know how many people are into regularly scheduled maintenance. It's not like a hobby. All right. So next up after hardware, I want to talk about mission planning. So what is mission planning? Mission planning is an often overlooked site where people will just show up to a job site with a drone and say, all right, hey, I'm here, I've got a drone, and then maybe fly it. But there are a couple of questions that you really should ask and think about beforehand. So mission planning is asking questions like, is this a good site for drone photogrammetry? Is it legal to fly here? What altitude should I fly? Drones can fly anywhere from 5 feet above the ground to 400 is the legal envelope in the United States. What's the appropriate overlap? How many GCPs should I set? Where should I set the ground control points? How do I arrange the flight pattern, and what data still needs to be surveyed on the ground? Now, once you get experience with drone surveying, you can answer a lot of these questions, but that's where what I'm gonna go into a little bit right now. But why care about this? Now, the answer should be a little obvious, but first of all, save field time. If you do your mission planning well, you spend less time in the field. So you just have to set fewer ground control points, so that's less time shooting stuff on the field. Less ground surveying, because you know everything that you're going to get from the drone before you even take off. Shorter flight times, because you can be efficient in how you actually plan your route. And no field revisits, because that's the real killer with all of this stuff. Whether you're using a drone or any technology, field revisits are just the worst. But it goes beyond that too. You also save office time with good mission planning. If you plan to take a mission that takes fewer photos, it leads to shorter processing time. You actually can get better accuracy. There are fewer errors in the photogrammetry workflow, and there's a simpler drafting workflow. So all of that just means, like I said at the beginning, save time, save money. That's the whole point of all of this. I'm not here to tell you about the $1 million NASA-funded research program that got the world's greatest accuracy. I'm telling you how businesses are using this and using it on every project to actually make money and save time. So diving right into this, some of our mission planning best practices. So here are, if you remember 3 things about mission planning, these are the 3 things that we recommend to remember. First of all, single lawnmower flight path. That means it takes off and it flies back and forth in one overlapping pattern with 75-75 overlap and nadir only, no obliques. That means the camera's pointing straight down. And you might say, hey, but Logan, I talked to someone or I read an article on the internet that says I should do a double lawnmower flight path. One's east and west and one's north and south. And that's more data, right? Yeah, it is more data, and it's going to take you twice as long to process. And we've done a lot of this stuff and a lot of testing to test on accuracy, and found that in the vast majority of projects, there is no benefit to that extra data in terms of accuracy. Same thing with overlap. 75-75, there are a few edge cases, particularly with really dense vegetation, where slightly higher than that can help. But most of the time, 75-75 is actually a little bit more overlap than nadir. And same thing with nadir versus obliques. The camera pointing straight down, because it has a fairly wide field of view, you actually are getting information at different angles as opposed to tilting the camera up. Now, one of the things that I commonly hear is okay, sure, that's probably the case, but isn't more data better? Like, I can always have that extra data, I can use it if I want, but not if I can throw it away if I don't need to. But is such a thing as too much data. First of all, saying that I can always get more data and it's free, right? Well, that assumes that your time is free. It's not. It assumes that your people's time is free. It's not. And it assumes that all of the computer resources that you're using are free, whether that's bandwidth, processing time, storage. Well, none of that's free either. There are costs associated with all of this, and they start going crazy when you start doubling everything up. So when you fly and gather more data than you need to, it leads to more time in the field where you're just standing there watching a drone, longer processing times, by a lot too. Processing times are non-linear, so if you double the amount of photos in a project, you're typically going to triple or quadruple the amount of processing time it takes. It results in larger and more cumbersome files and some possible erroneous matches too. So the solution in general, we say fly higher. That seems counterintuitive, but you actually want to fly higher than you really would otherwise want to. People always say, oh, but if I fly lower, it's better resolution. Yeah, that's true, but as we'll talk about in a second, that means you have to set a lot more ground control points to get the same level of accuracy, and it's going to take a lot more time, more data, that sort of thing. So fly higher, fly in a lawnmower pattern, not crosshatch. Even if the app says that the lawnmower pattern is for 2D and the double lawnmower pattern is for 3D, which some of these apps say, that is misleading. We get wonderful 3D topographic data many, many times a day with just regular lawnmower. And don't go to overlap overkill. Don't do it. Don't waste your time with a test that says, I'm going to go to 95% overlap on front lap and side lap. You're just wasting everyone's time, and it's not going to get you better quality data. I want to dive into a couple examples now too. So beyond just that basic mission planning stuff, there's also kind of where do you actually plan your flight? So I'm going to go through a couple examples that we have. Here's one of, honestly, these are bad examples. A lot of these are people that wanted to be clients of ours and they submitted this data and we said, no, we're not going to process it because we can't actually get accurate survey grade data out of these things. For some of these at least, this is one of those examples. You can see in these kind of green circled areas where the client's flying and then it drops down to just a single pattern overlap. This is an example, one of the examples that I would say is of just bad mission planning, someone not actually knowing what they're doing or knowing what they're trying to get. Anytime in the photogrammetry process where it gets down to that just individual strip of photos right there, it really kind of makes the project twist a lot. There's a metaphor that I like to use when it comes to projects that think of the drone flying as, or the drone map once it goes through the photogrammetry process as like a rubber sheet, and all of this stuff is holding it together, the individual photos, as well as the ground control points. The ground control points, which again, we'll cover that more in depth later, the ground control points here are going to be these blue things right there. So if you think of it as a rubber sheet, you can see at those thin areas, it's going to warp, it's going to buckle, it's going to cause a bunch of problems. So this is just one example of a problem of insufficient overlap. There are some other problems that we see too. This is one in high relief projects where typically when a drone flies at standard flight altitude, it's going to take off, it's going to go up to a fixed level, if you say 200 feet, and it's just going to fly at that level fixed, regardless of if the ground goes up or down underneath it. Now if the ground goes up into a hill, that becomes a safety issue because the drone might crash into the side of it. Not fun. But the flip side is, if, as in it happened here, they fly at the same altitude and the slope drops down to the side, you're actually going to get a little bit lower resolution down over here. And that means lower accuracy as well. So depending on the project, that might be okay. If the accuracy was 1/10 of a foot up in the top right corner, and it was 2/10 of a foot down here, that's probably going to be good enough, especially if they're just kind of doing rough topo. But it's another one of those things in mission planning to be aware of. There are terrain awareness features out there. A handful of autopilot softwares are capable of tracking the terrain, and that makes sure that there's a nice consistent ground sampling distance or resolution throughout the entire project. Another just interesting example of something that can happen in the mission planning project that you ought to be aware of is how things like water can impact photogrammetry. So water, by its very nature, is impossible to stitch in photogrammetry. Every second, the little ripples on the water change, so there's nothing to stitch together, at least on the surface of the water. But surveying is that sometimes a project actually gets split in half. Now, with a project like this, it looks like one nice clean block of fields, but really the way that a computer would see it or a photogrammetrist would see it when processing it is going to be in two totally separate blocks. And that means you kind of need to treat this one in the mission planning process as two entirely separate blocks, which means that you have enough ground control points for those two separate blocks, and you are aware of the implications, and you could even fly it separately, or you could fly it together, not really that big of a deal. All right, so I've been talking about ground control points a lot. Let's actually go into the ground control points because that's where most of the accuracy comes from. Now, this next table is really, really important for us and for our clients too. And when you need accuracy, this table really helps a lot. And this is, this is your expected accuracy. There we go. That's the one that I was talking about. How many ground control points do you need for a given project? And the answer is it depends. It depends on the accuracy you're looking for, the flight altitude that you're going to fly at, and the amount of area that you have to cover. Some of it's pretty obvious. The more ground you cover, the more ground control points you need. Okay, that's straightforward. The less straightforward thing is the higher that you fly, the fewer ground control points that you need for the same amount of area. And that's because when you fly higher, each photo covers a much wider stretch of ground so that it doesn't have to stretch as far between photos to set ground control points. So let me go into this a little bit and talk about some of the implications here. So if you were flying at 100 feet, it's about as low as you can practically fly for drone photogrammetry. You can cover about 5 acres of ground with a single 17-minute flight. I should also point out all of these numbers are designed around a DJI Phantom 4 Pro or a Mavic 2 Pro. If you have your own drone with different cameras, the specifications could be slightly different, but are going to be along the same order of magnitude here. But if you're flying at 100 feet above ground, you can cover about 5 acres with a single flight battery, and you need to set 5 ground control points. So that's 1 point per acre. If you were flying at 400 feet, those same 5 targets will actually cover about 50 acres, 10 times as much land with the same number of targets. Now your accuracy goes down. We say 4/10 of a foot vertical. We're actually a little conservative. We've typically gotten about 2 to 3/10 of a foot vertical accuracy when flying at 400 feet, but we like to be conservative on some of our marketing stuff here. But when you think about what are the other implications there, if you were flying that same 50-acre site and said, no, my buddy told me that more data is better, I'm going to fly it at 100 feet. Well, think about that. At 100 feet, you can only set 5 targets per 5 acres, so that means on 50 acres you'd be setting 50 control points. And all of a sudden, 50 control points sounds like a heck of a lot more of a pain than setting 5. Likewise, instead of being able to fly it with 1 flight battery, it would take 10 flight batteries to cover 50 acres, which is just a huge waste of field time and office time data, all of that good stuff. So these rule of thumbs, they're really important to remember. If you follow this, in most cases, you're going to be pretty good about setting the right number of ground control points, getting the right level of accuracy. Just to talk about accuracy once more real quick, when we say accuracy, or at least when I say accuracy, what I'm actually talking about is RMSE, root mean squared error. It's a statistical measure of accuracy that is more or less associated or akin to a standard deviation. And that's really the way that all of this accuracy is measured. It's using something called the ASPRS Positional Accuracy Standards. It's a nonprofit organization that, if anyone's curious, it's a highly academic set of standards for actually measuring accuracy from aerial data. Happy to talk about that afterwards as well. So let's talk about some more Gcb best practices now, right? So we go back here, 5 targets minimum for each one of those, but also it's a minimum of 5 targets for any project whatsoever. 3 is geometrically the absolute bare minimum that you would need to establish a plane. 5 is, in our experience, enough to not only set the bare minimum, but also begin checking the ground control points against one another to be able to identify errors and get rid of a handful of other issues that arise in camera calibration as well. But good rule of thumb for a really simple project like this: 5 ground control points, 4 in the corners, 1 in the middle, and then fly at least 1 flight line beyond the area of interest. So this matters for good quality data too. You can kind of see that the area of interest in this project is bounded by those streets. and you see the photos actually come out to the side. That's really important for drone photogrammetry because the way it triangulates all this stuff, the images come in from the side to look down into the project and ground control point. So you want to have some photos on the outside wherever possible to be able to triangulate accurately, especially on the edges of the project. So this is this is an example of what a project ought to look like. Good flight planning, pretty simple project, simple data. This one processed fine, no problem, single flight pattern. Some people often ask, okay, why isn't it exactly north-south oriented, the flight lines? From our experience, there's absolutely no impact from a data quality perspective, whether you fly north-south, east-west, pretty much nothing like that matters. It's more about convenience for the actual mission planning. So, couldn't tell you, I wasn't the pilot on this project, but that part doesn't really matter for flight planning. Any questions so far on ground control points? This is pretty important to accuracy with all this drone stuff. All right. So let's look at a bad example for now, or a couple of these. Here's one of insufficient ground control distribution. Not only that, from looking at this, they actually flew the project twice, kind of a offset crosshatch pattern, which I honestly have no idea why they did this. This is one of the many reasons why this is an example of bad flight planning. In fact, if our photogrammetrists saw that, probably one of the first things they do is take half that data and just delete it. Straight up delete it. Doesn't add anything to the project except complexity, time, just all kinds of problems as far as processing it. And it doesn't make up for the fact that there's bad ground control point distribution. And there are honestly a couple of problems here. First of all, there's nothing in the center. That whole center area, that's gonna have quite a bit of air in the middle, which is not good. But also, if you look down here, some of those ground control points at the bottom, those are outside of the flight line, which means that the cameras kind of have to look outward a little bit to be able to see them, and they're not going to be properly triangulated in the end photogrammetry model. And all of that introduces error. And error is a compounding thing in this, right? Each individual thing that you do wrong is not going to be the kiss of death. It might add a 1/10 of a foot error here, a 1/10 of a foot error there, a 1/10 of a foot error here, and then once everything's said and done, you process a project like this, and you're going to be seeing half a foot or more of error. And you're going to say, well, that's stupid. I had a great drone. I spent $50,000 on my camera, blah, blah, blah. Well, that doesn't make up for it. It doesn't make up for a bad workflow, bad field data collection, and bad procedures. Let's talk about another couple examples here. So we've got this one, which is a little interesting. Again, the double crosshatch pattern, totally worthless, too much data. That's not going to make up for the fact that your ground control points here are only on that small kind of segment in the middle right of the property. Now, this data that's actually within the bounds of that ground control point, a little bit outside, that data is going to be great. That looks fine to me. But they flew all of this extra data, and all of that's going to be inaccurate. And the further you get away from those, the more and more inaccurate it's going to be. I can tell you that everything here is going to be accurate to a 1/10 of a foot or better, and then maybe 2/10, 3/10, 5/10 a foot. It's hard to tell. Sometimes it kind of peels up a little bit at the end and gets really bad really quickly. But that's an example of what I would do in something like that. What our company would do is, if we got that data, is we want to call the client and say, what are you actually trying to do here? Is your area of interest the whole project, or is all you care about this? Either way, there's some improvement. If this is your only area of interest, well then one stop line crosshatch and fly a smaller flight pattern. It'll take less time in the field, it'll be quicker to upload, it'll be a smaller final file, makes everyone's life easier. So if that's what you care about, fly less. And if you wanted this whole area of interest, well then you need to set your ground control points out. Yeah?
On the previous slide, where there was no control in the center, oftentimes there is situations that are like that. Do you have any thoughts on how better to control maybe outside of the perimeter, where you can't even access the inside?
Yeah, great question. If you can't access the outside of the perimeter, if you can't access the center of a project area, the answer is fly higher. And it's very counterintuitive. So as you fly higher, the flight lines get further apart, right? So imagine that half of these are gone. Instead of having, 8, 9 flight lines, you're only going to have 4 or 5 flight lines between them. And that means that there's less interpolation that the photogrammetrist has to do between ground control points. So it's one of those really counterintuitive things. We actually had a really, really fascinating project that I love talking about. It was used in a court case that one neighbor was just kind of disgruntled, and he was blaming some like damage to his water rights on his other neighbor. But he was such a jerk that he wouldn't let anyone on his property to actually do a survey of the property itself. So we got a call, and they're like, we need a survey of this, but we can't set foot on the property. And the answer was very counterintuitive: fly high. Fly as high as you possibly can, legally. So 400 feet in that case. Set your control around the edges. So yeah, it's a weird one. There's some weird things that happen when you have unusual restrictions like that. So if you can't access the center of a property, higher equals better accuracy. Very counterintuitive. The other option as well is this is where onboard RTK and onboard PBK can actually really be helpful as well. That helps a heck of a lot when you have limitations to the amount of ground control that you can set. But that comes at the expense of a lot more money. Going into another project site, this is just another one that we got that was an example where the client didn't have ground control points, so he thought if he flew the entire site 3 or 4 times, it would actually come out good because more data is better, right? No, it doesn't. More data is not. It does not. Flying 4 or 5 different flights does not make up for lack of ground control points. It does not make up for other mistakes that you might make. Here's another project with a couple of different things going on. Again, we see this way too often, those double crosshatch flight patterns. People think that just adding more data will make up for their lack of knowledge in other cases. Not how it works. So a couple of things. One, we have our ground control point off to the edge outside of the project again. That's a problem. But we also have another situation here where, because it gets so narrow with this little section right here, that this little corner off to the side is actually floating off by itself. It kind of acts as its own project. And when that happens, that means that we need 5 ground control points in just that square. Now, if they had planned their mission so that there were actually photos across this area, even though he doesn't really care about those areas, then it actually could have gotten away with those 3 ground control points, because we can bring the rest of that data into the model to create, to tighten up, to make the entire thing accurate. But by having it in these multiple flights, too much overlap, some weird ground control points, that then goes back to that just kind of compounding error. Each one of these little issues causes a little bit more error and a little bit more problems. Here's some more just examples of not enough, on the left, you just have not enough ground control point. On the right, that's an example of what it looks like when a ground control point is on the outside of the flight lines. So it can only be seen by a couple of photos, and it has to be seen on the outer edges as well. So that's what I have for GCPs about actually setting the targets, or where to set the targets. But there's a little bit more too. How you actually mark the targets really matters as well. So a couple examples of bad targets. First off is something where you can't exactly see the center. This one was just an all-white. They might have even used a piece of paper, I'm not sure. It's hard to find exactly the center point of that. You can get close, but it might be off by a tenth or 2. Another thing is when people say edge of concrete or corner of concrete or something. It's hard to find exactly where it is down to a tenth or better on photos, but also when you're a photogrammetrist and you hear corner of concrete, if I didn't have that little spot marked, it could just as easily be that corner when I'm looking at it from the sky. That just makes the photogrammetrist's job painful. Whether you're the photogrammetrist, someone else in your office, or someone like Aerotas is doing your photogrammetry work, it's just painful. Same thing with chevrons too. It's kind of weird because everyone assumes that the way that they'll shoot a chevron is the way that everyone else does. We've seen chevron targets marked on the front tip, on the inner corner, and even at the midpoint between the front tip and the inner corner. And every person that we talk to is like, well, yeah, that's how everyone shoots chevrons. It's just kind of, it adds some inaccuracy as well. But I've got to say, my favorite of my entire time working in this job was when someone actually sent us a project. You can't make this stuff up. It was amazing. If you find something as clever as that to use as a ground control target, I'll give you the thumbs up, even if it's not the most accurate, because that's just amazing. So those are all, they're not terrible targets, but they're just not ideal. Really, just basic checkerboard pattern targets. You can buy them from the Home Depot for $20 $20, you can buy a pack of 20, you can drive a nail through them. They're really, really reliable, they're cheap, they're really easy to see the center. That's what we like. And then talking about integrating RTK and PPK data, RTK reduces the need for ground control and checkpoints, but ground data is still required for surveys. RTK, especially airborne RTK and PPK, is a very, very young technology. And it has so many different errors in it, so right now it is not even close to the level where we would just trust it blindly and assume that it works. You need to have ground data to check it, to make sure that it's accurate. It will check your errors, it'll catch a lot of human blunders that might just be something as simple as a coordinate system translation that someone screwed up. Happens quite a lot. And if you don't have any check data, you won't be able to catch it. So you do still, even for a lot of certifications, so American Society for Photogrammetry requires checkpoints to be able to certify it. I know a handful of other state surveying boards also require checkpoints even when you're using things with airborne RTK PPK. So, love airborne RTK, it's great, it's a wonderful workflow, but it's not, you fly it and that's all you need to do. You do still need to do some work on the ground. Okay, so we've got our mission planning, we know our flight plan, we know how many ground control points approximately we're setting, we know what flight altitude we're setting it at. What about collecting field data? This is the stupidest and easiest part of the whole thing, right? I mean, you just kind of draw a box on your iPad and hit go. And really nowadays that is about as much training as you need. But there's some benefits that you can use through good planning. For us, it's having standard operating procedures, and that means making it reliable. And this actually applies to more than just the field part, but also even the office part. Having checklists that go through for project planning, ground control, setting up your flight path, all of this stuff, it makes your project more safe, but from a business standpoint, it also makes it more reliable. I've been doing this for many, many years. People often ask me if I use checklists and operating procedures. The answer is yes every single time. And it's not because I don't know what I'm doing, it's because I've made too many stupid little mistakes that have, for whatever reason, caused a problem. I remember the last time I did it was a couple of years ago, where I went out to a project site. It was about an hour and a half drive from the office, and I didn't bring any SD memory cards with me. And that tiny little friggin' piece of plastic the size of a pinky nail lost me 3 or 4 hours to drive back, get some memory cards, drive back in the field, and it was just the worst feeling in the world. So this is why you want standard operating procedures. It's not because you don't know what you're doing, it's not because your people don't know what they're doing, it's because you want it to be reliable. You want it to be a simple, hey, you go out, follow this checklist, and when you get back, you know what the data's gonna be. It's reliable, it works the first time, every time. And the way to do that is with checklists. We have checklists. If you drop me your card, I will send you our checklists as well, just an attachment of an email. It's all there. Basic, comprehensive, easy to follow, and make it mandatory. It makes it more reliable. If you're ever working with insurance stuff, it helps with that too. What do we have on our checklist? I know I'm running a little bit short on time, so I might go a little bit quick through some of these last ones. But what's on our checklist? The whole field operations workflow. Checking the site for restrictions, airspace restrictions, obstructions, flight restrictions. Checking your weather forecast. That's kind of a duh thing, right? If it's going to be pouring rain, you can't fly the drone. Not just because of safety, but because the water is going to get on the lens, you're going to get bad data. So just that reminder, because it's easy to forget to check the weather before you go out and fly. Creating and saving your flight plans, packing up your equipment, making sure your batteries are charged. It's all that, again, all those tiny little things. Setting up your ground station once you're actually in the field. Putting together your aircraft, doing a basic inspection, shooting your ground data, your control points, your checkpoints and obstructed areas, checking your emergency procedures, and then the flight part itself is 2 simple bullet points. Mission loading, push upload, and running an operation, push go. Really easy. That's far and away the easiest part these days. And then data handling procedures, making copies of it, storing it, knowing where to transmit it, where to process it. There's no perfect answer. In fact, there are a bunch of different workflows that all can be successful. But either way, having a standardized workflow, that is what actually takes a drone program from a science fair project and turns it into a reliable money-making opportunity. So, I'll go through an actual real-life example here of project planning, setting GCPs, some of the different factors that actually come into play here. So this was a construction site. They were making a big subdivision. I think it's out in Arizona, actually. 145 acres. A couple of limitations there of where they could actually tie in. I know not the entire project site is accessible for setting ground control just because of the topography. But their accuracy spec wasn't particularly high. They needed 1-foot contours. So that means they could fly higher. And as I said before, if you can fly higher, fly higher. Less time, less data, faster, all better stuff. So what that means, 400 feet AGL, about 150 acres. It's going to take 3 flight batteries, which will be about 45 minutes total in the field. And that means they need to set 15 targets. 5 targets per battery. The rule of thumb pretty much holds really reliably, like really kind of shockingly reliably how good that rule of thumb keeps up. So 15 ground control points here. Let's pull it up on Google Earth. Here's just a really rough plan of where we said those ground control points need to be. No water features, nothing that might split this project in half. So they can be pretty well distributed, just about half of them on the outside of the project, half of them scattered throughout the interior. We see a couple of ground control points on the high end, some here on the low ends in the valley. That's all good to make sure it's tightened up. And again, this project really benefited from being able to only have that, from only being needed for 1-foot contours, that it can have just a little bit of wiggle room in the accuracy. So what does the actual mission plan look like? Here we go. That was the targeted takeoff position. Here's our flight boundary. You'll notice those flight lines go a little bit beyond the edge of the flight boundary. That red circle, for those curious, is just a 1,500-foot radius, which is the approximate visual line of sight. Once it goes beyond that, it gets really, really, really hard to see. But that's kind of the basic approximate flight pattern. Once again, single overlap. We can see the expected flight time, 42 minutes there, 3 batteries. If we were to double crosshatch that, we'd be looking at 6 flight batteries and then an hour and a half of flight time for absolutely no benefit in accuracy. So that was the flight, and then what does the data look like at the end? Ta-da! This messy thing is all of the major and minor contours, some of the brake lines, some of the other data actually worked in there. And this is what a lot of your final drone data should look like, right? Not just a pretty ortho photo, it should actually be CAD line work. So now I know I don't have too much time, only a couple of minutes, but I want to touch on what the office workflow actually looks like. Once you've done your mission planning, your field data collection, you've got a whole bunch of photos. And in fact, if you want, we have a presentation that's on our website called "So You Have 1,000 Photos, Now What?" So what do you do with that office workflow? Well, you have to do photogrammetry, which is taking that rich 3D model, or taking those photos, ground control points, stitching them into a rich 3D model. You draft your line work. There are a couple different tools to do that. You can draft it either in a point cloud, in a DSM, in an ortho photo, or in 2D data. And then you actually import it in CAD and finish it in CAD. Shameless plug, these data processing services are the things that Aerotas offers as a service as well. But that's the main steps in this simple workflow. But beyond the actual workflow, making sure that there is quality assurance throughout every single step as well. Now this is also really important if you want to actually have a drone program that saves you time and money. Because by adding multiple stages of quality assurance throughout the entire process, you're catching errors sooner, and that lets you save a lot of time. If you have a project that takes, call it 3 days from start to finish, and you only do a check at the end, and it turns out there was an error in this first step, you've just lost 3 days when you could have only lost an hour or 2. So to go back to this kind of drone journey, each of those major steps gets you kind of higher up in the drone surveying journey. So your photogrammetry will get you ortho photos, and if you're really good at it, high precision ortho photos. Line work drafting will get you some of your CAD data, your topo points, your brake lines, your planimetrics, and then integrating it into CAD is what makes that program a lot more reliable. The photogrammetry, just to dive into that a little bit, is the science of taking those photos and creating a rich 3D model, which are things like point clouds, ortho photos, and a digital surface model. And really, there are a lot of options out there. There are automated services like Drone Deploy, 3D Robotics, Propeller, where you just upload your photos, it processes them, and it spits something out. Those are really fast, those are simple, those are cheap, but they're typically not going to be survey-grade accuracy. You can do it in-house, Pix4D, HLSA Photo Scan. It works, but it is quite expensive, quite time-consuming, or there are companies like Aerotas that to reduce it to a CAD-friendly surface. So this is an example of a rich 3D model. It's actually a 2.5D model in this particular image, but what you see overlaid on top of it is the tin surface, the triangular network on top, that is the surface that you actually care about. Now the full 3D model for that project might be 10 gigabytes. The tin, where you only have those individual points, you have your brake lines, your curb lines, even your sidewalk lines, and some of the other markings in the concrete, all of your gutters and drains as well. That file might be a couple of megabytes. So really kind of reducing it into what you need. And then finally finishing it in CAD, merging your field shots. Taking all the data that you either practically or legally can't take with a drone. Boundary data, underground utilities, things like that, being able to merge it all into a single CAD file, adding your culture and your annotation, sealing it, and then creating a finished drone survey that's indistinguishable from a conventional survey. So just to kind of sum this up again, what that whole workflow looks like. You fly your drone, it gets you photos, ground control points, RTK, PPK data, goes through that photo imagery step, which turns it into an orthophoto, DSM, and point cloud. Those are your rich 3D model outputs. And then it needs to go through the line work drafting phase, which creates 3D points, polylines, something typically in a DXF format that's just points and polylines. And then you send it through CAD finishing, and that's what gets you your actual surface in CAD, your contours, your site culture, and all of that's going to be typically a DWG package. And like we said, this is what the final deliverable should look like. It's a survey. Can you tell that it was taken by a drone? No, because really that's what the client cares about, a survey. And in fact, not all of it was done with the drone. Some of it was shot on the ground. The final survey should look exactly the same whether it was made conventionally or it was with the drone. So again, now I will wrap things up, but final last plug, that part, the data processing side, that is what we Aerotas offer as a service as well. We actually do the photogrammetry, the CAD drafting service, so if you're interested, come talk to us. But ultimately, I will now wrap things up, so thank you very much. If you want, drop off your card and I will send you the slides for this presentation, actually a video of this presentation as well if you're curious. We are actually recording it. And our checklist, our field operations checklist as well, we can send to you just so that you have it. And with that, thank you very much.